Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen in Budapest. I am very thrilled to be talking to you today about Emmerich Kálmán's The Riviera Girl, or Die Csardasfürstin Goes to Broadway. My name is Kevin Clark from the Operetta Research Center Amsterdam, and you can reach me on our website, where you will also find background information on all the things I'm going to talk about now. And needless to say, I would look forward to getting feedback from any of you. To talk about Emmerich Kálmán's Csardasfürstin and its US-American performance track record puts an immediate spotlight on two central points of operetta history that are overlooked very often. Namely, the fact that operetta before World War II was a decidedly international industry, where successful shows traveled easily from Vienna to Budapest to Berlin, Paris, London and New York, or the other way around. And secondly, it shows that operetta was always adapted in the travel process to fit the tastes of audiences in different countries, but also to synchronize the music with the changing stylistic fashions of each era. The American performance history of Csardasfürstin makes that more than clear from the beginning, and luckily there are sound documents that allow us to hear how Americans interpreted this operetta in the mid-1940s and even how Emmerich Kálmán himself conducted the work. These are recordings mostly unknown to operetta fans in Europe, and I am delighted to present them to you here today. But first, here are some basic facts. Already the very first operetta by Kálmán, 1908's Tattayaras, traveled from Budapest to Vienna as Ein Herbstmanöver and onwards to the USA. It was seen on Broadway in July 1909 at the Knickerbocker Theatre as The Gay Hussars. It was produced by Henry Savage. You'll recall that Mr. Savage had imported The Merry Widow to Broadway 2 years earlier and had scored a major success that put Lehar's name on the international map and big money into his bank account. Savage and others, such as the Schubert brothers, were busy from then onwards to import as many new Viennese operettas as possible, and The Gay Hussars was one of them. Alas, the Kálmán show ran for only 44 performances compared with 416 of The Merry Widow. Still, Kálmán's next new shows were all produced on Broadway. He even wrote the African voodoo operetta Golden Dawn directly for New York in 1927 with the legendary Oscar Hammerstein. For their Broadway productions, European shows were not just translated into English, but often rewritten substantially. Americans preferred a different style of singing and acting, and operetta had to compete on Broadway with local vaudeville and music hall traditions, but also with minstrel shows and the lavish extravagances such as the legendary Ziegfeld Follies. In many cases, up-and-coming US composers were asked to adapt the music, or producers inserted new American songs into the scores to make them more attractive for local audiences. European producers, by the way, did the exact same thing when they brought Broadway operettas such as Sigmund Hornberg's The Student Prince or Rudolf Frimmel's Rosemary to Vienna, Budapest or Berlin. Because of the outbreak of World War I, shows from so-called enemy countries did not travel as easily as before, and the Viennese operetta Die Csardasfürstin of 1915 did not reach the Prince of Wales Theatre in London until May 1921. France had to wait even longer until March 1930 before it could see Princesse Czardasz. So the Americans were comparatively quick in bringing Csardasfürstin over in September 1917. Since all the American newspapers ran stories about the aggressive and evil Germans on their front pages, this latest Kálmán show was promoted as a Hungarian operetta to avoid any association with Germany and Austria. Fittingly, Csardasfürstin first opened in a Hungarian language production at New York's Terrace Garden Hall on September 9. Then 2 weeks later, on 24 September 1917, there was a lavish English language production by Klaw and Erlanger at the New Amsterdam Theatre, which is on 42nd Street and Times Square. The title was The Riviera Girl, and the version had a new libretto by Guy Bolton and P.G. Woodhouse. The show was originally supposed to have been called The Monte Carlo Girl, but the producers found the title of that had been generally used for burlesque shows. If you think this means strip shows with bouncing nipples on stage, you are 15 years off the mark. In 1917, burlesque's chief distinction from Broadway venues was that they were non-equity, meaning that they were played with non-union actors, so burlesques were cheaper to produce. To avoid any suggestion of cheapness, the title was changed to the more high-class Riviera Girl, and Silva Varescu became Silvia Varesca, a glamorous vaudeville singer working in Monte Carlo. Monaco was a place as far removed from the horrors of World War I as possible, suitably chic and European, and it had a slight French flair that suggested naughtiness. The story of the Riviera Girl runs as follows, according to the newspaper Variety. The story concerns a young nobleman called Charles who wishes to marry a vaudeville artiste with the usual parental objections on the part of his father, Count Michael Lawrence. The introduction of an extremely aggressive American named Sam Springer from one of the towns of the hinterland, who is supposedly abroad to study gambling conditions in Monte Carlo for a report to a vice committee in America, but is still trying to work out a system to break the bank, starts the complications. It is Sam Springer's suggestion that the youth with the desire for matrimony be informed that his father can be tricked into accepting the girl, Silvia Varesca. The scheme being to marry her to some broken-down nobleman who will allow his name to be used for a fee, part the couple immediately after the ceremony until the divorce is arranged, and then, when she is freed by the court, with the title, the boy's father can have no further objections. Sam knows this trick will work, for he saw it done in a play back in Fishville, USA. But the father is in on the deal and a double cross has been arranged. The hired nobleman is to be further paid not to permit of a divorce until the boy has married elsewhere, namely his childhood sweetheart Claire, who is the daughter of his friend and confidant Count Ferrier. As the story develops, it is discovered the supposed waiter who was employed as the bridegroom and as a fake nobleman is in reality a prince who has been an admirer of Sylvia for years. And when the time for parting comes, the bride discovers that she is really in love with him and he with her, while Charles discovers he still loves Claire while he had been waiting around for Sylvia's divorce. A double wedding is on the horizon. So is the ship which is to take Sam Springer back to the United States together with his wife Birdie. She won at roulette what his system lost, and she decided that Monte Carlo doesn't need reforming. This was obviously a very different story and different ending to the one designed by Leo Stein and Bela Jenbach for the original Vienna production of 1915, more in the contemporary musical comedy style for which Bolton and Woodhouse were famous. In their autobiography, the two authors claim that the original Csardasfürstin libretto, like all Viennese libretto, was simply terrible. And they were very proud of the new textbook they devised. To quote them again, both authors thought highly of it. Boy, Guy would say to Plum, which is Bolton's nickname for Woodhouse, his eyes sparkling, you could take that plot down to the bank and borrow money on it. And Plum, his eyes sparkling too, would agree that you certainly could. Bolton and Woodhouse's new musical comedy, Oh Boy, written with composer Jerome Kern, had opened triumphantly 7 months earlier and would run another 7 months to 463 performances. It played in the small 299-seat Princess Theatre, where the witty lyrics and smart, decidedly American story could be heard. The New Amsterdam Theatre, on the other hand, had 2 balconies and seated over 1,700 people. There, at the New Amsterdam Theatre, the emphasis of the producers was not on well-timed comedy. Instead, they wanted to create an opulent visual spectacle. They hired the famous stage designer, Joseph Urban, to create settings which are said to exceed in beauty and richness anything in the pictorial line heretofore seen upon the stage, and costumes and other accessoires are in the same scale, as the Washington Post noted. Urban designed a gorgeous scenic investure and an ever-occurring flood of colorful costumes depicting Monte Carlo. The newspaper Variety wrote, The first scene shows the garden theatre of the Côte d'Azur, splendidly done. The second is the garden surrounding the villa of one of the principals during the course of a flower party. And the third is the rotunda of the Côte d'Azur at night. For all three, Urban has employed that unusual blue sky for his back. It is the same blue that Maxfield Parrish is famed for, and further, there is a suggestion of the latter artist in the trees in the second act. On top of the beautiful scenery, the producers hired 30 girls for the chorus and 16 boys. Variety noted. In addition to this, there are 4 dancers, Clore and Erlanger, duplicating the Gillingham idea of a quartet of super chorus girls. In this case, they are girls formerly with the Ziegfeld Follies. The Kálmán score, which the Christian Science Monitor claims was pleasantly insinuating and had a couple of numbers that are undoubtedly destined to be popular, was rearranged and reallocated, and there were new songs added, most importantly by Jerome Kern, the writing partner of Bolton and Woodhouse. He contributed the song Let's Build a Little Bungalow in Quogue, which became the hit number of the production. The title role of Sylvia Varesca was played by the attractive Vilda Bennett, who would later be Madame Pompadour on Broadway and the Lady in Ermine. She played it in a charming but rather unanimated fashion, as Variety observed. On the whole, the cast, as directed by Herbert Gresham, did not deliver a snappy comedy performance. They seemed so underdirected in the dialogue scenes that Gresham was hardly mentioned in the reviews. Instead, many New York critics complained that they could not understand a single word of the lyrics. That's probably because the orchestra of nearly 40 instruments offered lush sound, but drowned out the singers. And without a director of great skill and the witty lyrics mostly incomprehensible, the supposedly bankable story, constructed by Bolton and Woodhouse, lacked charm and humor. The only fun element was Sam Hardy representing the breezy Illinois reformer who contributes a lot of tall, vigorous, and good-looking buffoonery, as the Chicago Daily Tribune wrote. The Clore and Erlanger production of the Riviera Girl lasted longer than the Gay Hussars, that's true. But with 78 performances, it cannot really be called a success, compared with 151 performances of Shari on Broadway, which is Kálmán's American version of Der Zigeunerprimasch, or the 224 performances of Miss Springtime, which is an adaptation of the Hungarian Susi Kisassoni. Please pardon my bad Hungarian. It was certainly not a new Merry Widow, and even though the Riviera Girl was not a major hit on Broadway, it did go on a national tour throughout the United States in the following 2 years. It was played in Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Washington, Boston, Buffalo, etc., right down to Kansas City, Omaha, and Springfield. Some of these cities even got to see the Riviera Girl twice in the course of the tour, and so in the end it did turn out to be a success, financially speaking. After that, the show was somewhat forgotten. However, there was an outdoor production in 1932 in St. Louis at the Municipal Opera, which is a huge amphitheater seating 11,000 people. St. Louis again used the Bolton Woodhouse version, but it was now hailed as a Kálmán masterpiece as opposed to a Clore and Erlanger spectacle. This time around, the producers managed to get the comedy elements, the casting, and the stage direction right. The reviews were positive, especially about the book that the New York critics had trashed before. The Riviera Girl is gay, delightful fun from the outset, states the Staunton Star-Times. The newspaper had special praise for the comedians. Harry K. Morton as Sam Springer and Hope Emerson as his wife Birdie contribute most of the fun in this operetta, the lines of which sparkle with the wit and humor of Guy Bolton and P.G. Woodhouse. The Sylvia of 1932 was Yvonne Darl, a star of the Metropolitan Opera House in New York and of Ziegfeld Musical Productions. She was also the original Countess Maritza on Broadway in 1926. In other words, St. Louis managed a good balance between Broadway-style musical comedy, vaudeville, and operatic glamour. Even though there was still a strong American touch in the story in this Bolton Woodhouse version, thanks to the characters of Sam and Birdie, by 1932, Operetta was seen in the USA as a nostalgic, old-world extravaganza set in fairy tale locales such as Monte Carlo or Old Heidelberg, Vienna, or even Budapest. Such otherworldly nostalgia is what the genre had morphed into, as opposed to the consciously modern musical comedies written by composers such as George Gershwin, Irving Berlin, or Cole Porter, not to mention Jerome Kern himself. Richard Trauner sums this new definition up in his book Operetta, A Theatrical History, and I'm quoting, "Operetta, flowing champagne, ceaseless waltzing, risque couplets, Graustarkian uniforms and glittering ball gowns, romancing and dancing, gaiety and lightheartedness, sentiment and Schmalz." End of quote. This positioning of operetta as Schmalz in the style of the sensationally successful Student Prince is a stark contrast to what happened with the genre in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. You could say that Broadway's Riviera Girl represents operetta at the crossroads in America, between contemporary entertainment with up-to-date popular music and plots and something being considered a sentimental European fairy tale with princes and gypsies. The book by Bolton and Woodhouse emphasized the modern approach, but the 1917 production by Klaw and Erlanger sabotaged this, turning Riviera Girl into a deplorable failure, as Bolton and Woodhouse themselves put it. St. Louis proved 15 years later that it is possible to stage the US version successfully and get the best of both worlds out of it. Because Kálmán scored major successes on Broadway in the 1920s with The Yankee Princess, which is the American version of Die Bayadere, with Countess Maritza, with Golden Dawn, and with The Circus Princes, and because the 1930 Paris staging of Csardasfürstin was a big commercial success, interest in the original show did not die completely. The Americans dug it up regularly for radio broadcasts in the 1940s, but this time around they did not play The Riviera Girl as a Broadway title, but as a classic Schmalz operetta from Vienna. The English language version now used was the 1921 adaptation by Arthur Miller and Arthur Stanley with the title Gypsy Princess. That is the version you hear on the US radio programs mentioned earlier. Emmerich Kálmán had 3 of them professionally recorded and stored in his archive. These are 1. The Chicago Theatre of the Air from October 1945 to from November 1946, as well as the Celanese Hour from July 1945. Highlights from these 3 versions have been released on CD by the Operetta Archives in Los Angeles under the title Kálmán on the Air. Yvonne Kálmán helped put the CD together and get it produced with Michael and Nan Miller. Here is the beginning of the overture from the 1946 radio broadcast from Chicago, newly orchestrated and played in the then current Hollywood style of lush romantic entertainment by conductor Henry Weber. As you know, Kálmán and his family had to flee from Vienna in 1938 when the Nazis invaded the country. Since he could not return to Hungary either, where Horthy led an equally anti-Semitic government, which eventually killed Kálmán's sisters on a death march to a concentration camp, the composer emigrated to Paris and then onwards to the United States. Upon arriving in New York in May 1940, Kálmán was given the opportunity to present his music to an American audience via a radio broadcast concert that he conducted himself. In this concert, with soloists Gitta Alpa from Hungary and Felix Knight from Hollywood, Kálmán presented an orchestral medley from The Riviera Girl. It's the only known recording of Kálmán himself conducting this music. What you will notice is that the new orchestrations also match the style of Hollywood musicals from the late 1930s and 40s, the films of Janet MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. Kálmán had already allowed the Csardasfürstin to be turned into the jazz spectacle in 1930 in Berlin at the height of the jazz craze he himself had participated in with Die Herzogin von Chicago. He now was more than happy to play this music in the current popular romantic vein. As his Viennese librettist Alfred Grünwald noted in December 1940 in a letter from New York, I'm quoting, "Of course people here have different taste, but it's not as different as you think. Good adapters are the most important thing. If I hadn't rewritten Victoria und ihr Husar for Vienna and Berlin, it would never have been such a success. I hear the Schubert brothers have let our shows be touched up by third and fourth class arrangers who got a few dollars and were let go. Obviously, nothing good can come of that." End of quote. Because Kálmán agreed with Grünwald that good adapters were the most important thing, he did not object to the earlier Bolton Woodhouse version, nor did he oppose the 1930 jazz version, nor a completely rewritten review version by Fritz Fischer that he presented in Germany in the 1950s. The only question for Kálmán was, is it an adaptation that promises to be a commercial success, generating income? Kálmán never insisted on any original version of his shows to be played. On the contrary, he was always open to new ideas, and he was very keen to study new trends and incorporate them into his work. This was true right up to the end of his career, when he incorporated Broadway's latest cowboy craze, following the success of Oklahoma and Annie Get Your Gun, into his final operetta, Arizona Lady. But back to 1940. Kálmán also presented his music back then in the romantic vein of Hollywood, but you will notice that he conducts it with as many whip-cracking accents that are not typical of performances in the USA, but they are very typical of the European tradition that Kálmán himself comes from. He also demonstrates a rubato culture that you will not find in any other recording of the Csardasfürstin, old or new, American or European. So here is Kálmán conducting Kálmán with the NBC Symphony Orchestra on May 5, 1940. The aforementioned radio broadcasts from the 1940s present die Csardasfürstin in the same romantic Hollywood style. I'd like to play you the finale from the show as heard on the Chicago Theatre of the Air in 1946. If you listen closely, you'll notice the actors saying that this is all a romantic farce with a happy ending on a golden throne of exquisite music, as can only happen in an operetta. The genre is as far removed here from real life as possible, and it fits the gilded schmaltz definition of Richard Traubner to a maximum. The tenor you hear, by the way, is Richard Tucker. The other man on the recording is Robert Weedy, who later became quite a Broadway legend himself.
Charlotte, my beautiful gypsy princess.
Ronald, my wonderful gypsy prince.
Prince and princess on a golden throne of exquisite music.
The perfect ending to a beautiful operetta.
Allow me to pull the curtain down, my children. We seek for joy and see its shadow in a vision. But evermore the shadow flying in derision. All on in a faithful heart, the shadow reigned in all joy abide, if over all true love be reigning.
So what happens afterwards? Does the US performance history of the Riviera Girl or the Gypsy Princess stop in 1946? No. The show was presented in New York again in the 1980s as a touring production of the Wiener Volksoper in the original German language version. It was advertised as the first time in America direct from Vienna. But neither the Riviera Girl nor the Gypsy Princess ever entered the US repertoire in the way that Oscar Strauss's Chocolate Soldier did, not to mention the immortal Merry Widow. One of the few places in America with a notable performance history of Kálmán titles, including operettas that are totally forgotten even in Europe, is the Ohio Light Opera. However, they present Kálmán's operettas in such a consciously nostalgic golden schmaltz style that it seems unlikely they would ever consider doing the Riviera Girl in a bouncy comedy production. Even though Ohio has successfully presented various princess theatre shows by Bolton, Woodhouse and Kern, and even though they have useful casts that could succeed with this material. But you never know, it might still happen one day. Till then, perhaps the Budapest Operetta Theatre, with its versatile and energetic musical comedy ensemble, can give the Riviera Girl of 1917 a modern performance and recording, just so the world can see and hear that there is more to die Csardasfürstin than 1000 kleine Englein singen, and that this Kálmán show is not necessarily about nostalgia, or at least not about that kind of golden nostalgia that has been imposed on it from the mid-20th century onwards, not only by Americans but also by Europeans. In other words, there is a very breezy and modern Broadway version of Kálmán's most successful operetta still waiting to be rediscovered and reappreciated, with a little bungalow von Quogue strewn in as a catchy extra. Many thanks for your attention.